Okay, so this is Yinhao Qian, and this is my lab demonstration for ECE 1175, lab number 5, sorry. So let's first try to go to text 1, the bash file. So let's go to Ranger. And we can see we have the following code: the run code, the task 1 bash file, the task 2 bash file, and there are 2 more C code that we can see from here. And TC1 and TC2 are just already pre-compiled code that we can just run from. So for the run code, basically what we're doing is we're just simply compiling the code for tc1.c and try to run the tc1 from the directory we wanted. And for the for the task number 1, basically what we're doing is we're first trying to set the CPU frequency to a very high number and try to run the C code from TC1, and then we can lower down the frequency to a smaller number and try to see the difference between the running time. So that's for task number 1. For task number 2, what we're doing is we're just simply running the TC2 code. But in the TC2 code, what we're actually doing is we're actually trying to calculate the total time and the idle time in the CPU before and after we run the sample code TC1. And then we can see the difference, and then we can calculate the utilization ratio for different cores of the CPU. So let's try to run the 2 bash files and see the result. Let's go to the directory. Because we're setting the CPU frequency, we have to go to the super user mode. So we're just going to do sudo, I'm just going to clear the screen first, sudo su. And first we're going to run the test1.bash file. As we can see, the CPU frequency has already been set to a very high number, and we're now trying to compile the code for TC1 and run the code for TC1. And it takes about 6.425 seconds to run the process, and if we lower down the CPU frequency, we can see the number gets larger. We can see it takes 6.732 seconds to complete the process. So we can definitely see there's an increase for the running time. So now let's try to go to the task number 2. Okay, so for the test number 2, we see that before we run the code, the time elapsed from the boot and the system boot is those numbers. The total time is this for CPU, this for CPU 0, and this for CPU 1, etc. And after we run the program TC1, we can see there's a slight change of those numbers. And now we can take the difference of those numbers and try to calculate the utilization ratio for each core. And we can see for the CPU, in total, we can see the utilization ratio is about 0.21. And for CPU 0, it's very low. It's actually just about 1%. But for this core, it's actually very high. It reached about a very high number of 84%. And that is a very trivial small number as well. So we can draw the conclusion that the CPU 1, which is CPU 0, CPU 1, which is here, will have the highest utilization ratio. And that's the point of checkoff. And thank you very much.